Welcome back to Dungeon Brew, where we are continuing our Monster Tactics series. Today we are talking about giants. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Hey everyone, we are continuing our Monster Tactics series by talking about giants today. If you've been enjoying our tactics series so far, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Joshua, do you want to get us started with talking about how do we handle tactics when it comes to giants?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first off, it's important to state that there are a number of different giants, some that are in the section about giants and some that aren't, that kind of go across this grand, like, arc of things that we would consider to be giants. Where maybe we'll talk about hill giants, frost giants, fire giants, storm giants, cloud giants, there's ettins, there's trolls, there's a number of things that you could probably classify into this group. So we want to talk about some of the basic things that you're going to see from these while recognizing that there are some differences in the way that they may approach giants. For instance, the ones that have the higher intellect may have spellcasting, while the lower ones may be a little bit more rudimentary in their approach to engaging in combat. But for the most part, all of them have this ability to throw rocks and keep their distance from the enemies that they're fighting. And they are going to utilize that, especially in terms of ambushing their enemies, instead of going toe-to-toe. I always think of, like, we have this, like, Western ideology of going toe-to-toe, like boxing in combat. And as a GM, you have to recognize that if you do that with giants, those encounters are going to become very boring very fast.
Yeah, they're relatively short. I mean, they are giant bags of hit points, but generally their ACs are not particularly high, with the exception of like fire giants, I guess. But most of them, their ACs are relatively low, and they're just a lot of hit points. So it's just use your biggest hits, especially if you've got fighters with great weapon mastery and stuff like that. They're just going to cleave through giants. But yeah, like the rock throwing thing. They have a huge range. Like the low range is 60, but even for a hill giant, it has a +8 to hit. So if it's throwing a disadvantage from 220 feet away, it may not hit every single time, but it's at least, it's putting pressure on. And with a +8, there's a good chance that it's still going to hit, especially against some lower AC characters. And if there's multiple giants doing this, that's the case as well. And this is true just across the boards. They have really high attack values, so go ahead and give them the opportunity to throw from range. You mentioned intelligence a little bit, so the other thing that I would mention is that they're going to make use of the terrain in various ways, initiating avalanches, rock slides, cave-ins, those types of things. They have the rocks to throw. They're going to throw them at the hillside or the mountainside to initiate these types of natural disaster type situations. And that type of thing is definitely going to create a more interesting encounter, just in terms of like, okay, so now you have giants throwing rocks at you. They started an avalanche on top of your head. What do you do? And it becomes a skill challenge rather than just a combat challenge, and it creates terrain features that are more interesting, I think, as well.
And I really appreciate you bringing up the terrain piece, because I'll tell you that if you play a campaign that is centralized on giants, or there's like an arc of giants, it gets really old really fast of just going up and fighting the giant over and over and over again without setting up different environments for them to strategically have to engage with that giant in. And the giant has, in my mind, oftentimes lived in the world for a long period of time. The world is their playground. So they know where they should be strategically placed at to have the opportunity or the opportune, drop on the party in some way. And the other thing that I like to think about in regards to terrain is how giants themselves may impact the environment around them. If you're talking about frost giant tribes or fire giant tribes, you would think that them living within an environment may have an actual effect. Whether it's going to be a molten area or a frigid area, or storm giants having a lot of like electrical storms and stuff happening where the tribe lives, that again could have some really interesting features when you have the party engaging with them in that terrain.
Yeah, and I think the main thing here, and this is kind of the direction you're going with it, and I think that this is important, is that giants in and of themselves tend to result in somewhat dull encounters because they're tactically they're very thin in a lot of ways. Throw the rocks, close the distance, hit them with your club or whatever, situations. With a few exceptions, Fomorians have their evil eye. I'm trying to think. The Ettins have the two heads, so there's the increased perception, and then, like you mentioned, cloud giants and storm giants, they have some spellcasting, but generally speaking, giants don't have a whole lot going for them in terms of versatility for their stat block, and what you're talking about is really close to what you would find with like the 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐷s or giants or not giants, sorry, dragons. I'm gonna keep doing that. Giants and dragons. See, I just did it again. Dragons and their regional effects. So they have regional effects for things like the white dragon, where there is snow and blowing ice and sleet and things like that create a regional effect that adds interest not only to the approach to go and deal with these creatures, but also in terms of the combat itself, because then you're fighting in their terrain. It almost becomes like a lair action. And I like the idea of that being tribally related. So it's the tribe of frost giants. It's not necessarily one big creature. Combined, they create this effect because you have to deal with all of them, or you have to reduce their numbers enough to be able to reduce that effect, because maybe the frost giants have settled down in a region and snow and ice has begun to creep down the mountainside and across the lands, and all the crops are freezing. And so then the locals are having trouble surviving because they can't get the temperature warm enough for them to be able to even raise their food.
Yeah, which I think makes it a lot of fun. But I agree with you. The original like stat block for giants can be kind of dull to utilize. So John, what things might you do to spice it up? What abilities or features would you give to an individual giant that might make encounters a little bit better without just completely wiping the party?
Yeah, so I think that for some of these you might adjust the CR by like 1 or so, but not a huge amount. I think, like I said, tactically they kind of have this base. So fire giants, frost giants, hill giants. They've got this base, that's kind of what they are. Hill giants are an easy one. Give them false appearance, the same way as like a gargoyle or a piercer or any of those other ones that can look like a rock. Allow him to sit down and curl up in a field and look like a boulder. I mean, it's a very straightforward thing. It doesn't change really anything in terms of the difficulty, but it makes sense intuitively that the hill giant just kind of has this appearance that allows him to take cover. It makes sense that this is maybe the primary tactic the hill giant uses for hunting prey, that it just kind of curls up in a field and looks like a boulder. It's definitely going to get your players, surprised if all of a sudden a giant stands up next to them and tries to smack them with a club so that it can eat them. And it's like I said, it's a pretty straightforward thing. I don't think it would adjust the CR at all. It really just kind of adds some versatility to the way that those encounters play out for that particular creature.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I also have always been kind of surprised if there's not some sort of ability for the giant like to walk up to a creature and stomp the ground and just cause like a slight vibration and knock them prone to give them advantage on those attacks.
Right.
In some way, just within like 5 feet or 10 feet, within the reach of whatever their weapon is, and allow them to knock enemies prone by just stomping and then swinging. I guess it depends on the size. If you're talking about maybe a 7-foot giant, whatever, but they're 8-9 feet tall.
Yeah, I think fire giants. I mean, I've got the thing right here. Most of them sit between. Let's see, the low one is 16 feet tall, and the high one is 26 feet tall, and that's for your base giants. That doesn't include like Ettins and things like that, but that's. Hill giants, storm giants, fire giants, all those. They all fall into that huge range where even a hill giant is 3 times as tall as the average, human, which is significant. But no, I like that idea. And you could definitely just put it on like a 5-6 cooldown where it's like you roll a d6 on a 5 or a 6, he gets it back and he gets to use it. And if it's a strength saving throw to everybody in the party who's within 5, 10, 15 feet, depending on the size of the giant. And if they fail the saving throw, maybe they take a few points of damage. It's not really about the damage. It's mostly about knocking them prone to give the giant advantage on its attacks, which are already almost guaranteed to hit. It's more of a flavor aspect, I feel like, than anything else. Yeah. Because most of the time it's going to hit anyway. This is just kind of adding insult to injury to a certain degree.
Well, it does keep the players to use half their movement to stand up, so it prevents them from necessarily fleeing, too, to get out as far.
Yeah. And it definitely helps against those defensive people who want to run up and cast shield on themselves and do all this other stuff and go, I've got a 27 AC. Well, I just got advantage against your 27 AC because you failed your strength saving throw. So there it is.
So another thing that I'd like to see too, just in terms of upping the stat block, and I'm curious on how you would do this in regards to like moving the CR level for them, but specifically for your fire giants, your frost giants, and your storm giants, is adding some sort of like fire shield, cold shield, or even electrical shield around them. But when you hit them, it does damage back to the enemy because they're radiating off this type of elemental magic from their body.
I like that a lot. So one of my favorite monsters is the rot troll, because the rot troll, when you hit it, it just kind of splurts out this acidic, poisonous goo at everybody within like 5 feet of it, which is really difficult to deal with in a melee heavy party where you have to be close up and fight this. But like, even what you're talking about isn't necessarily like you hit the fire giant and it splurts out like fire against everybody. It's more along the lines of, if I hit it, I take damage specifically to me, which is very common for things like the fire salamander. I don't even remember if that's a thing in 5e anymore, but there are definitely monsters that do this, and you can just steal that and add that onto the fire giant or the frost giant or the storm giant like you were talking about. Again, I think that this is maybe a CR1 increase. It's not a huge deal, especially if you're not doing a massive amount of damage. I mean, if you're doing every time you hit it, you take 4d10 damage, that's a problem, but you can definitely do something less where it's like a d10 or 2d6 or something along those lines.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other things that you might want to do with it, but those initially are just like great ideas, just to make it so that the giant at its CR level is somewhat challenging for a 4-man party at that level. Because right now, when I look at those CR levels, I'm like, no, man, we can just wipe this thing out.
Yeah, it really, you have to play them almost tactically perfect, where it's, you've got the fire giant up on a hill, he's out of reach, he's throwing rocks at the party, they don't have anywhere to go, so they have to close the distance, and they're under fire as they're trying to climb up a mountain. Yeah, very dangerous in that situation. If you encounter a fire giant in his lair in a smaller room, then he's got nowhere to go, and the distance gets closed, and he gets wiped out in a couple of rounds. There's definitely that sense of you have to play them tactically almost perfectly for them to be a real threat to the party, which I find frustrating. Some of the other things that I would look at is some innate spellcasting for your elemental types. Storm and Cloud already have it. Give Frost and Fire Giant innate spellcasting. One a day, I'm trying to think here, like Sleet Storm for your Frost Giant, like once a day for that, once a day for a Fog Cloud. They might have something where they can throw a Frost Bolt or some kind of equivalent of that at will. Fire Giants should definitely have something like Heat Metal. They could have various fire spells of some kind that are also one a day. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily give them Fireball, but it wouldn't hurt to have something like Aghanazar's Scorcher, which again, I don't even know if that's a 5e spell anymore, or Burning Hands, or Firebolt, or anything along those lines. And I'm not, this is the conversation I think we had a little bit with the Mummy video. These don't really affect how difficult the Fire Giant is, to be perfectly honest, because most of the time these spells do less damage than what the Fire Giant can do by swinging his weapon. He does more damage than he can do with a spell. The purpose of these is usually to add variability and interest into the fight. So having something where he is casting Heat Metal against an enemy, because he can cast that from a farther range. Then you have a couple of Fire Giants throwing boulders. You have a couple of Fire Giants who target the 2 melee fighters in the enemy, or of the PC party, and try and get Heat Metal on them. It changes the dynamic of the fight, it changes the interest of the fight, and it provides a different tactical element that isn't just, I swing my weapon and whoever swings the hardest goes down, or whoever has the most healing goes down. And then the last thing I'll say about Fire Giants in particular is they actually have a decent wisdom. It wouldn't hurt to throw in a Fire Giant Cleric of some kind, or Priest. They've got the wisdom for it, so allow them to have, Acolyte level spells where it's like, it's some low level stuff, but it's again interest into the battle to make it feel like there's more going on than just swinging weapons back and forth.
I really appreciate you mentioning that. I was actually going to say something about, giant communities and societies and tribes. It's like, you just can't tell me that all of them have just an occupation in rock throwing.
Right, which is, a very frustrating thing about it. But the thing is like Volus expanded this. You have like the Frost Giant Everlasting one, you have the Fire Giant Dreadnought, but again, those, they're ultimately just not, it's not enough to really add interest here. It's kind of like the same thing as like orcs or what did we talk about a few weeks ago? I think the bugbears. The bugbears just don't have any depth in their ranks. So providing depth into the ranks to create variations for the various giants adds interest into the battles. It makes them more tactically interesting and doesn't just turn it into a slugfest, like you said, a boxing match basically in the middle of the ring.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what I have. That's for more of a general, just generic overview of each one of these. I mean, I understand that each one might have a little bit of variability in how you approach it based on their stat block and what they do. But I think that's a really good just overview of giant tactics.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, I think that's all we've got today for giants. So if you like the video, again, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. All of those things help to grow the channel. If you have interesting giant fights or other ideas that you think would be tactically interesting for giants, please put those in the comments down below, and we will see you next time.
Dungeon